Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And when I made my video on the Critic a while back, my primary goal was to acknowledge and celebrate this remarkable show from the mid-90s. At a time when The Simpsons was really the only game in town for adult animation, the Critic really stood out for all the right reasons. But despite finding a solid fan base, it was abruptly canceled after just 2 seasons, and ultimately, it just became this fondly remembered gem from 90s era TV. But then, in late March of 2025, the voice of Jay Sherman himself, Jon Lovitz, came out in support of reviving the show. And shortly afterwards, show co-creator Al Jean echoed this sentiment. Now I promise, I did not expect this news while working on my first video on The Critic. And while I doubt that video had anything to do with this news, I get the sense that there's real support for a revival of this show. The timing even makes sense to some degree. Other shows from the 90s and early 2000s have been getting revived, such as Futurama and Beavis and Butthead. And other revivals have since been greenlit, most notably King of the Hill. Between 90s nostalgia and the never-ending demand for content on various streaming services, there is a real chance that a Critic revival could happen. However, as much as I would love to see Jon Lovitz reprise his role as Jay Sherman, it's worth asking some important questions. Could a revival of The Critic actually work at this point? And even if it's ultimately greenlit, is it doomed to stink? Because regardless of how much you loved this show, any effort to revive it presents more challenges than most. As I pointed out in my previous video, The Critic was very much a product of its time. It relied heavily on the general 90s aesthetic as well as the unique world that emerged during that era, especially with respect to media. But that world just doesn't exist anymore. The jokes, the tropes, and the plots that worked so well back then just wouldn't land as well in today's world. Then again, those circumstances are also a big part of why The Critic has aged much better than most shows of that era. It was a time when major movie studios and media companies were just starting to merge into the bloated behemoths they are now. The movies Jay Sherman often bemoaned might have been parodies of popular movies at the time, but they often stunk for the same reasons. They were dumb spectacles meant to cater to dumb audiences. There was no substance behind the story, no greater depth that left a lasting impact. Most just threw popular names like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Tom Cruise into the script and let the movie sell itself. Anything beyond that requires time, money, and effort that Hollywood producers would prefer not to spend. Flash forward to today, and you don't even need to resort to parody. The business of making movies has long since won out over the art of making movies. It no longer matters whether a movie actually stinks. It only matters if it turns a profit, expands a franchise, or somehow justifies the bloated price of streaming services. Jay Sherman would have a lot to criticize, to say the least. That alone lays a good foundation for a revival. However, things get complicated when you take the format of The Critic and place it into the present day. Because a critical part of the show revolves around Jay being a legitimate film critic with his own show on a major TV network. This isn't just something he does as a side gig. He actually went to school for this. He got a degree in film. And his harsh criticisms often put him at odds with media executives, especially his boss, Duke Phillips. But this notion that someone could be a professional film critic on a major TV network, that sort of thing just doesn't exist anymore. And it can't exist as it once did, even for a revival. Because these days, there are no high-profile film critics in the mold of Siskel and Ebert. Instead, we have aggregate scores on Rotten Tomatoes or number ratings on IMDb. Film critics aren't people doing detailed assessments of films. They're just numbers for a website to compile. Could Jay Sherman really operate in a system like that? Well, he probably could, but there's no question that he would hate it. There's also no question that a show like Coming Attractions just couldn't exist on TV. At best, it could operate as a YouTube channel. But even then, Jay's criticisms would run into another serious complication. Pretty much every platform for reviewing movies, or reviewing content of any kind, has been flooded with competition. Yes, there are still professionals employed by major media outlets, but they are vastly outnumbered by fans, amateurs, grifters, and various online personalities. On top of that, many of these individuals often push certain political agendas, mostly as a means of attracting like-minded audiences and the clicks they invariably bring. And sadly, these obnoxious voices often drown out more refined criticism. Just go to YouTube right now, type in any movie title, and add the word reviews to the end. Chances are, most of your top hits will come from channels whining endlessly about wokeness, SJWs, feminism, or whatever other thought-terminating cliche happens to be in vogue. And absolutely none of that would sit well with Jay Sherman. He would probably think that those people are every bit as terrible as the dumb movie executives who can't think beyond the next gimmick. But even if his criticisms are valid, they'd likely be completely drowned out by the louder, meaner, stupider people who don't know what they're talking about. So, if the Critic is to return, it will have to change a key aspect of the original show. And that's always risky, as other failed revivals have found out. If Jay Sherman is to still be the lovably harsh film critic we know and love, then his method and his medium needs to change. That's likely to be the biggest challenge for any revival of this show. But there are plenty of other challenges to work around. For one, numerous voice actors from the original series have either passed away or aged out of their roles. For animated shows, recasting is often easier, and it can work out better in the long run, as we've seen with shows like X-Men '97. But finding the right voice is the easy part. What they do with the character will be a far greater challenge. Marty Sherman, Jay's son, was just a kid when the show ended. Would he be aged up in this revival? And if so, how much would he be aged up? And what would he be like? Him being this lovable kid with an idealistic outlook was part of what made Marty so great. If he's older and more jaded, would that even work? Personally, I'd be very skeptical. Then there are Jay's adoptive parents, Eleanor and Franklin. If they're older in this revival, how would that affect their characters? Some of the funniest moments in the whole show came from Franklin's cartoonish antics. And any Critic revival without those antics is not one worth pursuing. Then there's Alice Tompkins, who became a huge part of Jay's life by the end of the second season. After spending the first season struggling with multiple women and dealing with his bitter, spiteful ex-wife, Jay and Alice's relationship really blossomed. Alice wasn't just responsible for saving Jay's career. There was this sense that they really wanted to be part of one another's lives. How would a revival handle that? Would they advance this relationship? Or would they just throw it away like most other revivals tend to do? Personally, if this show is revived, I hope it doesn't take the easy road. There will be a temptation to cut ties with many elements of the original show. That would help make way for new characters, new settings, and entirely new dynamics. But therein lies the problem with every revival. If it becomes so different, then it ceases to be the same show. It might as well be a spin-off or glorified fan fiction. I don't think a revival of The Critic can work if it takes that approach. If it were to just drop Jay Sherman into the present year, removing Alice, Jeremy, his parents, Doris, and Duke, then tried to fill their absence with brand new characters, it would fail. Fans would not accept it. Sure, they would love seeing Jay Sherman at first, but the discussion wouldn't be about the various novelties of the show. It would mainly revolve around people asking, where's Alice? Where's Duke? Where are all these characters that I remember and loved? Say what you want about excess nostalgia, but a show like The Critic just can't work if it lacks many of the elements that made it work so well in the first place. To successfully revive this show, it would take some serious effort. It would require all those involved to balance the spirit of the original show with new plots and updated settings. Now, that is not an insurmountable task, but it would be one of the most difficult revivals to date. So, to that end, I'd like to offer some ideas for this revival. I doubt that John Lovitz or Al Jean will ever see this video, let alone take any of my ideas seriously. I am not at all smart enough or qualified to grasp the complexities of quality writing for reviving a beloved TV show. But despite my limitations, consider the following setup for a Critic revival. we once again enter New York City in current year. That same jazzy theme music by Hans Zimmer plays in the background. We then enter the apartment of Jay Sherman, where we find him talking into a camera with his trademark snark, lambasting the latest Disney live-action remake. It may look like the set of his former show, Coming Attractions. We find that he's in his messy, disorganized personal office, sitting in front of a computer screen, surrounded by empty pizza boxes, editing movies for some nameless studio. Like so many other movies of the day, he says it stinks. He hates this job. He'd much rather be criticizing movies rather than editing them. But it's the only work he's able to get since his show went off the air. Working mostly from home, he lives with his wife, Alex Tompkins. They've been married for years and now have a young son together, Maddie, who is the spitting image of Marty when he was younger. And while he loves his son and his family to no end, Jay is not fulfilled in his work. Alice, who still works for the Philips Media Mega Corporation, formerly known as the Philips Broadcasting Company, is also burned out. She does make good money, but she resents the media personalities she has to work with, calling them all petulant, immature narcissists who need to be pandered to 24/7. As for Duke Phillips, he has only grown in power and influence over the years, having consolidated multiple media entities, including streaming services and movie studios. It has fueled his ego even more while further adding to his many eccentricities. So, in an effort to get away from work, they visit Jay's parents, who have become stereotypical online boomers. Franklin's eccentricities have only been magnified by a host of streaming media, making him a hyper-obsessed fan of multiple franchises. And Eleanor has taken to using Facebook as her personal grievance factory, for which she pays teenage hackers to spread. It deeply troubles Jay and his sister Margot, who is now a veterinarian. Their parents are just a prime example of what the modern media landscape has done to people. Outrage and clickbait has removed real criticism, especially in media, and the old world he once thrived in is long gone. But just as Jay is contemplating an uncertain future, Duke Phillips comes to him with a proposition. He just brought a social media platform and renamed it to P. And while he's trying to make it into what he calls a super app, he needs a different kind of content. So he asks Jay to do a stream in the mold of his old show, Coming Attractions. Jay jumps at the opportunity, but only if Alice comes with him. They even get Marty, who is now a Twitch streamer, to help out. This ends up being messy, chaotic, and leaves Jay completely out of his element, but he's still able to use the show to attack the modern media landscape. He calls out streaming companies for their obsession with quantity over quality. He calls out the audience who doesn't even engage with movies anymore, opting to just use them as background noise while scrolling on their phones. He calls out Hollywood for being cowards, never taking risks and relying only on established franchises, remakes, and revivals. But more than anyone else, he calls out other critics, saying they're the gasoline that's adding fuel to this fire. By chasing clicks, buzzwords, and trends, they're emboldening the very things they criticize. They ignore substance in favor of agendas. The only movies they like are the ones that pander to them and them alone. And that's not criticism. That's just pathetic. Jay's overly harsh message triggers many, for better and for worse. But it does get him trending. It also gets people onto Duke's new platform. And despite resenting the criticisms, he sees that Jay has struck a chord. He's not just saying modern movies stink, he's criticizing everyone, and they're responding. This definitely has potential, and while Duke's many assistants and associates urge him to fire Jay on the spot, he tells them all to get lost, because the critic is back. Now, what I just described is something that I just came up with off the top of my head. But what do you think? Would you want a revival of The Critic with this premise? Would you follow it for multiple seasons? Or do you think it stinks? Whatever your sentiments, I'll certainly keep an eye out for more updates. If the day comes when Jon Lovitz and Al Jean make it official, I'll definitely follow this news closely. The world may be very different from the days when The Critic was still on the air. But one thing has not changed with respect to movies and the times in general. There's a lot of stuff in this world that's worth criticizing, and plenty of it really does stink. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.